Almeda, if I rightly understand part of the thrust of your symposium and what you've shared with us in our conversation, you've commended to youth ministers and youth workers that they do some deep thinking about the dynamics of ancient practices, how they functioned, what the internal engineering was of how the human engaged in those practices in a way that opened them up to the presence of God, and understanding those dynamics, those movements, then understand how those are recaptured in maybe a different idiom or a different form. But we're going to have some folks listening to this or who attended the symposium who are going, either I don't remember my classes in seminary or experiences in church where I learned those dynamics and the how and why do we sing or pray or do the Eucharist, or I never had that class. So can you point us towards some resources that will help connect youth ministers and youth workers with those resources that will help them understand the dynamics of these different practices?
There are quite a few resources that have taken up these same questions in terms of liturgical studies, and some of them get a little heady and theoretical, but the two that we found very, very useful in this course was one book that we actually had as our kind of guiding text for the week, and this was Dorothy Bass's edited volume on practicing our faith. And this book takes you through 12 different spiritual practices, but in particular there's a chapter on singing. Something as simple as singing that is written by Don Salyers. And Don Salyers in this chapter reminds us that the idea of coming together to sing songs or to sing hymns and worship draws people in a different way that actually later in the week, and we've had it, we've seen grandmothers, we've seen ourselves do it, where we're humming a song that we sang in worship, and it's either helping us to kind of, why am I singing, Mighty Fortress is our God while I'm washing dishes? Is there something in my life? And so he gets to a little bit of the ways that we see it happening and then gives you the theory to say, this has been happening to people for years, for centuries, and this is the reason why we come together, because you're going to need that hymn if you're struggling, or if you don't know what to say when you get that call and your friend's mom has just had some crises. And the words of these hymns teach us truths about God. And so he gets into a lot of that. And there are other examples like that in this resource by Dorothy Bass. The other one that I often use in my Intro to Religious Education course is that I try to teach people how to teach people about worship and how they learn in worship, or how the act of worship and songs and all these Christian practices have what we call an educative role. It means they teach us something. The resource that I always turn to is a little slim article by Byron Anderson, called The Liturgical Catechesis. And what he shares in this article is that we actually learn a lot by the embodiment, or the way that our bodies move in terms of liturgy and practice. For example, he talks about the way that kneeling for prayer already is making a statement about what we understand about God and what the purpose of prayer. It says we're humbling ourselves before God, that we're submitting to the will of God, or we've got some major petition that we're not coming to an equal. But at the same time, if I'm praying and I lift up my hands raised might give a different theological resource. And so again, that 30 pages is one of the students come back to me and often say, it just changed the way I think about it, because I never thought that how we embody worship, or how we model for young people, what does it mean to be in a prayer posture, or to pray standing or sitting or looking up to heaven or looking down, what that was teaching us. And so there's different things like that that are out there that really are just conversation starters. And I think that's really what youth ministers and young people also want, something to get to invite them. For example, out of this Anderson article, I had a youth worker form what she called the stations of prayer, where she took 4, maybe 5 different ways of praying, different movements that we were going to use with prayer, and she had young people carousel through them, and it turned into an amazing experience. But she was like, no, I needed that resource to help me know the significance of this so that I could then invite my young people into this activity. And so it became way more meaningful for them. But then they were coming back to her, she said, when they saw them in worship, I saw people lifting their hands, or I saw some people kneeling. And I knew what that meant, that there was something deeper and stronger than just somebody extemporaneously, doing church hands or spirit fingers.